Welcome to Energy Talks, part of the Uliza Usichezwe series by the Kenya Civil Society platform on oil and gas. We're happy that you're joining us today. Today we have with us Kate Mavuti, who's from the Extractive's Baraza, based at the Strathmore University in Nairobi. Kate, karibu.
Asante sana, it's a pleasure to be here.
So, let's start more broadly. You've been in the space now. You've been one of the pioneers in the Kenya oil and gas scene. Let's just start with a bit of a background about yourself and tell us a bit more about you.
Well, thanks that I'm a pioneer. I'm a lawyer. First and foremost, I'm a lawyer by profession. And I really had an interest in the oil and gas sector from a very, very early stage, when Kenya decided, or when the discovery became a bit more popular, if I can say. So I actually have a background in oil and gas law, a master's degree from the University of Aberdeen. And that allowed me to come into Strathmore University through the Strathmore Extractives Industry Centre and the Extractives Baraza to work on a lot more projects in terms of extractives at large, so mining and oil and gas. Currently undertaking my doctoral studies, PhD, registered at University of Cape Town. And I also lecture at the Strathmore Law School, their undergraduates with the oil and gas modules there, and their master's program in oil and gas. So that's in brief.
Okay. Tell us a bit more about the Extractives Baraza. Extractives Baraza, again, a pioneering institution, just like the civil society platform,
right,
in the oil and gas space. How was it founded? What are the current projects that you're working on?
So the Baraza is, actually, maybe I should start in general with the Extractive Centre, the Strathmore Extractives Industry Centre, what I will continue to term as SAIC. This is a research centre which is attached to the Strathmore University Law School. And what we do is that we do quite a bit in terms of research and a lot of stakeholder engagement. We like to call it evidence-based research because we actually go to the ground, we carry out a lot of meetings with different stakeholders and information dissemination. And that's where the Extractives Baraza comes in. Now, this was, I believe, brainchild is the best way to use, of Dr. Melba Wasuna, back when she was with the Strathmore University. And the idea behind the Extractives Baraza was basically to have a space where there is a collection of relevant information needed by the different stakeholders, be they government, be they private sector, and even all the way down to the community, in a way that is very easy for them to access information about very many things, whether it's legal reform or conversations around specific issues in the extractive sector, or even knowing who are these stakeholders in the extractive sector. So we have the Extractives Baraza. It is an online platform. And it works in tandem with the larger umbrella Strathmore Extractives Industry Centre.
Okay.
Yes.
And I think that's a good segue into part of a discussion I want us to have today around what are the big issues at the moment. I think you said you joined once Kenya had declared that they have commercial reserves of oil around 2012. Can you take us through a bit of that journey in terms of how you see it and how what progress we've made?
It's quite a lot. And the good thing is that there's a lot more interest in the field of extractives in Africa, not just in Kenya, but in Africa. And where that takes us as Kenya is that there's a lot, as Kenyans, we're very resilient and we're very innovation driven. We like to be the first to pioneer in different kinds of firsts in very many things. And so with the extractives industry, and especially in Eastern Africa, with the discovery of oil in Turkana, what happened is that there was a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of unknowns in terms of what is the business behind petroleum, for instance. What are the specific peculiarities about the petroleum industry and the large extractives industry? What kind of being a lawyer, what kind of legal regulations and reform, or what does a legal framework behind petroleum look like? We had a Petroleum Act before, but is it adequate? Is it inclusive of all the matters and issues that are now coming up because there's this discovery? So some of these issues, I'm happy to say, were some of the projects, if I can call them that were taken up by the center. Granted, we did start up heavily, skewed towards the mining industry, again, because the mining industry is a bit more established in the Kenyan, in Kenya, but we gradually moved into the oil and gas space. And with that, different issues, and this is something I'm also passionate about, transparency and accountability in the sector. How does that look like? Local content, there are so many conversations around local content. Now, what is local content? How do we benefit optimally as a country from this industry? What, issues such as that.
I mean, I just want to stop you there a bit because you brought up an interesting issue around local content. So, I mean, local content was, at some point, was one of the, I felt at different points in our discovery, there has been one driving narrative. So at some point, local content was that driving narrative where we said, and again, there's a discussion, a strong discussion between local content and local content. I remember the policy moving, even switching to saying national content, sort of this reflection of Kenya as one, as opposed to local. I mean, what are your views on that? And, is local content dead now? Because, I mean, there's very little activity at the moment. And so there's nothing to drive that push for beneficiation at the moment.
Absolutely not. Is local content dead? Definitely not. There may have been a bit of, a break, or maybe break is not the best word to use, but a bit of relaxation in terms of the activities, the active activities and projects being carried on around the oil and gas sector. But you see, you have to understand exactly what you mean by local content. And like the way you brought up with local content in general, local, what are those things? What exactly are we looking at when we talk about local content? Are we looking at, economic empowerment? Are we looking at different kinds of innovations, technological innovations? Are we looking, in terms of positioning ourselves within the global market as oil and gas producers? What exactly are you looking at? And when you then understand what is meant by local content, you can see that there are so many things that are still ongoing in terms of empowerment of community, empowerment of our ministries, in able to position themselves well, to either negotiate or carry on economic activities within the extractive sector. There is quite a bit that's happening still. Is it dead? Absolutely not.
Okay. The point that you raise around, local content and what you mean, I thought it was pretty straightforward in one sense, because what you're trying to say is that the argument has been that these sectors can be enclaves. So you have an enclave within your country, and then so there's talk of huge FDIs flowing in, but they're also flowing out at the same time, right? So you have a foreign company using foreign contractors, using foreign employees, and so while you can say, oh, there's an investment of $2 billion, but then if you look at outflows in terms of the even just basic employee salaries, everything is still going back out. So you find that the net gain is sort of very little.
Yes.
And then in light of the fact that a lot of this is cost recovery. So basically, again, that's just, another outflow. So whatever is spent is actually paid back and sort of outflow. Yeah.
So it doesn't seem like there's really much staying in country.
Yeah.
Well, this is why I insist that one really must understand what is meant by local content. And I guess, again, bringing up now, I guess, the role of academia is trying to create that kind of understanding within, the community and the specific stakeholders. Seemingly there is a lot in terms of going out and less in terms of staying in.
Yeah.
But if you look at local content as in-country value addition, what are we actually adding? What kind of value is being added into the country? Are we at a level to say that, for instance, and this may be a bit different from local content? Are we earning in terms of economic benefit from the extractive sector? Are we earning in terms of expertise within the extractive sector? I would say we are. I'm an example of having been trained abroad and coming back home to practice at home to elevate the industry at home. We have quite a few people such as myself who have actually brought that kind of expertise learned outside back home. And then that kind of elevates our own position as well. Are we gaining, different kinds of opportunities? Like we talked about business in one of our projects within the extractive sector, the center. And basically scaling up business and their ability to really not just work within the extractive sector, but work within traverse different kinds of industries. If it's a welding company, for instance, if it's a Mama Wamboga, for instance, are those kinds of requirements that are, specifics and requirements required for business and to get in business within the extractive sector, how then do you pivot into the larger industry? So these are some of the things that when we talk about local content, we just can't look at what are we gaining within a small box. We kind of have to open up our minds a bit. What value is being added to the country from the sector? And then how can then we leverage that into different other sectors for economic benefit?
And I think, this conversation is also going on at the Pan-African level. I think the African mining vision is one of those, again, policy instruments that are used, trying to address that particular issue, that it was seen that it's an issue in the sector. And so, and it needing that to be addressed in terms of, like you mentioned correctly, value addition. And value addition is very different in mining as opposed to, I guess, oil and gas, if you look at it. Yeah.
I would say that a lot of the conversations around, trying to create instruments to address some of these local content issues are really to ensure and to guarantee that value addition. Not necessarily that it wasn't there before, but there wasn't really a systematic way in which a country or a specific jurisdiction could adequately optimally benefit from the industry. So a lot of these instruments are pathways to guarantee that value addition, I would say, both, within the Pan-African context and domestically as well.
Okay. So I want to take you back a bit. We spoke about the legal framework and the legal framework being set up. One of the things that came out of the Petroleum Act was the Transparency and Accountability Framework. And that was supposed to be set up within the structures of the Petroleum Act. And so I know you were involved in part of the process of drafting of the Transparency and Accountability Framework. Can you tell us a bit more of where we are in terms of that process?
Yes, absolutely. It was one of my absolute privileges to be able to work on the Transparency and Accountability Framework. As you've rightly said, it came about trying to achieve the section 111, I suspect, correct me if I'm wrong, of the Petroleum Act, which actually says that a framework should be developed for the reporting, transparency, and accountability of the upstream sector. So we started this work with KEPTAP from the ministry, government. And the idea behind it was to come up with a practical kind of structure to be able to really say, what does transparency and accountability look like within the extractive sector, and particularly within the petroleum sector? When we're talking about transparency, what are we being transparent about? To what extent are we being transparent about when you look at contracts, when you look at, for example, production data? When we talk about accountability of whom and to whom? This is where now we include the private sector and different government ministries. And the beauty about our work with the transparency framework is that I think we went above and beyond in terms of looking at not only the upstream sector, but really transparency across the value chain of the petroleum sector. On top of that, we created an action plan, because what you have now is sort of a structure in which, right, we've looked at international instruments, international best practices. We've looked at case studies who are really doing this thing called transparency and accountability properly. What lessons can we learn? And we've attacked that within the framework. And then we've come up with ideas in terms of what is needed to be done within the framework. But then what? And then what? So that is where the action plan comes in. The action plan actually sort of sets out the specific stakeholders that would be involved in a transparency and accountability kind of system, and what it is that they're supposed to be doing, including draft, for example, monitoring and evaluation forms that we created. So it was quite a lot of work that went into it, proudly so, and we worked with a lot of industry professionals. Work is done. Work was done. And now, I guess it's awaiting adoption from ministry. So that's
Okay.
where we are.
Is it going to be the panacea? Is it going to be where once it's actually adopted, that things will change, we'll find a more transparent and accountable structure in place?
That is the hope. The hope is that this is an instrument that will really kind of open up the field of transparency and accountability. There's this saying that, the petroleum sector, really not extractives, but the petroleum sector is a bit secretive.
Yeah.
And,
opaque, actually, the word is used is opaque. Yes.
Opaque.
Yeah.
And as an academic, I say, well, that is relative.
Yeah.
But you see that the beauty about this framework is that it really takes into consideration the priorities and the interests and the vulnerabilities of the different stakeholders. Yeah. By different stakeholders, I'm meaning both private sector, government, and even communities themselves, because they too have a right to specific information and disclosures about the sector. What I would say is that, like any piece of regulation, it is a sort of guidance into what needs to be done within the industry to promote transparency and accountability. With now the merger of the State Department of Petroleum and the State Department of Mining, I would suggest that there is a lot of synergy that can happen within, especially the mining sector, because, like I said, it's a bit more established within Kenya, and how then that can feed into the petroleum sector as well, and then as a whole have a sort of holistic and pragmatic approach to transparency within the extractive sector in Kenya. So the hope is that it's a guidance. Okay. It will be a guidance to all stakeholders, also taking account of their peculiarities.
So let's speak about academia and academia's role in that space. What do you see as the academia's role in ensuring? I mean, are you, in terms of priorities, do you see yourself as working on the ability, for example, for Kenya to benefit from its resources? Mm-hmm. Is that sort of a huge priority? Is it transparency and accountability sort of a bigger priority? Mm-hmm. Is analysis, sort of general analysis of the sector, I think, like you mentioned, also reviewing best practice elsewhere, mm-hmm. and seeing how that would apply in this context. Is it political economy questions? What role do you see academia playing in that space?
All of the above.
I'll have to push you a bit to be a bit more specific in terms of priority.
Yes, yeah. Yes. For me, initially, and maybe this is also, I need to go back a bit in terms of my background. I've always been a bit corporate-minded. That's how I started my legal journey. But then getting into academia, I've been exposed to quite a bit in terms of what you're asking, what is the role of academia in specific issues, and in this case, in the role of extractives. Academia, I would say, first and foremost, is knowledge generation. And this is extremely important within the extractive sector because it kind of, provides a support to specific issues that come up within the sector, whether it's issues of environmental stability and environmental issues within the extractive sector, whether it's issues of revenue, which we have also worked on as well, revenue management, revenue allocation, revenue collection, issues of stakeholder engagement. And in this case, not just the regular stakeholder engagement that we know of, but deliberate, targeted, sort of redefinition of what stakeholder engagement means. Purposive conversations towards finding solutions to the problems that are coming up. And now, I'd be remiss without talking about the impact of the global pandemic on the industry. Academia would also play an amazingly large role in terms of understanding how is the industry placed within this new reality, and what are some of the innovations or innovative ways that we can maneuver within our current space.
Sorry, don't mean to interrupt, but I wanted to, that specific point on the pandemic. I mean,
Right.
how do you see, how has the pandemic, for example, impacted any of your programs? But the other bigger question as well is, how do you see a post-pandemic, what's a post-pandemic outlook for the sector?
Like every other, everyone else, we as the center, and we as academics, and we as the extractives industry have really been affected by this pandemic. We've had to really go back to the drawing board and figure out, like I said, how do we move? How do we maneuver in our new space? We had, I guess, also because of the pandemic, issues of the economic downturn, price drop, market issues. As academia, we can, for example, no longer have the conferences that we want to have, but that doesn't stop work. Work still goes on. How we, for example, as a center, have managed to do that is that we've, like everyone else, we've really invested a lot in terms of maybe not in-person one-to-one communication, but information dissemination through maybe online webinars, policy briefs, and different partnerships to really find out how it is that we can do that as well. There's a partnership we have with Energia on a project for an information hub coming up soon, and different other projects as well. My project, for instance, I'm currently undertaking a PhD on business and human rights. I haven't been able to travel, unfortunately, and part of my thesis or part of my research involves travel to the actual communities, because I'm dealing with non-judicial grievance mechanisms and how they then lend themselves towards realization of the Sustainable Development Goals within the extractive sector. And that includes going to the ground and doing actual research. I haven't been able to do that yet.
Okay. But I want to pivot you a bit to sort of the post-pandemic future of the sector more broadly. And in terms of context, I want us to also discuss the energy transition. And so I think I want to wrap a few of these questions up into one question. So basically, what is a post-pandemic future for the oil and gas sector?
Yes.
And how do you see Kenya managing that? And also in the energy transition, and how do you see these challenges impacting Kenya's dream to be an oil producer?
Post-pandemic future, I think we have to be very, very strategic as the extractives industry and how we move forward. Very strategic in terms of what are our priorities? What do we want to achieve within a limited space and a limited capacity with the pandemic? But that said, I believe necessity, I think they say necessity is the mother of invention. There is a lot in terms of new ideas of how to deal with different issues that are coming up because of the pandemic. It will take time. I must admit, it will take time, and it will take a lot of resolve, and it will take a lot of investment from the specific stakeholders, a lot of time given, a lot of mind power, I like to call it mind power, and a lot of partnerships. So there is, I think, a new future for the extractives industry only because we have found ourselves in this position, and possibilities are exciting to think about and are endless. In terms of transition from into what do they call it? Clean energy.
Yeah.
Clean energy. Again, there is this presupposition that oil and gas people are not for it, but we have to be pragmatic. We have to be practical. Where are we headed to? Where is the world headed to? But at the same time, we want to advance environmental protection and stability and sustainability. But at the same time, we have to do it deliberately and strategically. And that means involving different kinds of people, including specific only oil and gas lawyers, mining professionals, oil and gas professionals, and other non-renewable professionals, for instance. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I want to really thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate your insights on some of these sort of challenging times. Was there anything else that you'd like us to bring to our attention at Energy Talks?
I just want to thank you for this opportunity. And I want to really encourage, everyone out there that it is not all bleak. There is so much work to be done still. And, there's a lot of renewed strength in terms of new ways of dealing with things. And I just want to encourage people to tap into this as well. Sign up for the Extractives Baraza, a newsletter, something that happens every week. And yes, invest in research, because research is future.
Okay, you've heard it from Kate Mavuti of Strathmore University. Research is a future. Thank you for joining us in this episode of Energy Talks.